Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Hello, everybody. Happy Saturday. Boy, I got a great show for you today. No cheap shots, because all my guests are very thoughtful and well-informed. Last night, Jennifer and I went to the Indivisible Chicago post-election gathering. It was really great to be with, so many who gave their time and talent to the grassroots work that was so important this cycle. And now we have the data to know that it really made a difference. It narrowed Trump's popular victory. It delivered a few Senate seats for us and helped down ballot too. I am beyond grateful to everyone who did this work. And, maybe I want to shout out a few of the people I saw when I was there last night, starting with my sister-in-law, Sally, who was the first person I saw when I walked in. And later I met Kathy and Nelson, a painter and a photographer who are not about to walk off into the sunset. They are as committed to the fight for our democracy as any of the young people I met. And finally to Ron. Ron, I hope you're listening. I met Ron on the way out. He told me he was a regular listener to our show. Anyway, thanks to everybody for the work, the real work. Now, let's get on to something else. Because while I'm really grateful for the people who are out there doing the work, I have completely lost patience with the pundits on the left writing columns that begin, Democrats just need to. Look, seriously, we face an actual threat, and it isn't coming from Democrats. So I want to say to these guys, grow up, take the hit, and get back on the horse, just like all those folks at Indivisible did. Look, this talk isn't doing the country any favors. Every day since the election, someone who knows how dangerous Donald Trump is takes time to instead portray Democrats as weak, as divided, as hapless, as unsure of what their values are. None of this is accurate, none of it. And all of it plays handmaiden to right-wing propaganda. Let me give you a different take. Democrats actually did a lot right. They ended Trump's pandemic. They ended Trump's recession. They rebuilt the economy. They onshored businesses. They unleashed billions in private investments. They beat inflation. They launched a generational infrastructure building program. They made progress against climate change and wealth inequality. I, for one, am proud of that work. Now, Joe Biden was unpopular. His approval rating stood at about 40%. Worse, 70% of Americans said the country was on the wrong track. Look, Joe Biden is still president, but after Trump's elections, Republicans in increasing numbers are now saying things are great. That should tell you a lot about the nature of those numbers. And maybe Democrats should have done more to combat the propaganda machine that underpinned those views. But the First Amendment is a powerful and a good thing. We got work to do there for sure. But politically, let's be honest, no incumbent party ever wins when the public says we're on the wrong track and the president's approval rating is in the tank like that. But despite those headwinds, Democrats barely lost. Donald Trump's popular vote majority is the smallest in more than 100 years. Think about that. We won 4 Senate seats in states Trump won. That's unheard of in an election year like this. And it looks like the Republicans may, only pick up 1 or 2 House seats. I mean, we overperformed. And after the election, in earnest, serious Democrats began the process of poring over data and planning strategies for the next election. Backseat drivers, they aren't helping. Look, the challenge to America is not whether Kamala Harris wore pants instead of a dress. Are you kidding me? But Donald Trump's contempt for the rule of law, his determination to use the power of our government to punish his critics, his disdain for the actual work of government, so obvious in his nomination of a cabinet that would be the least able in American history. And look, we are still more than a month away from Inauguration Day. And already there's evidence that this will be the most corrupt administration in history. Trump promised to bend American policy for pay to big oil, to crypto, to Musk, and already billionaires are queuing up to make their deals, happily selling the rest of us out in hopes of becoming American oligarchs. Ugh. Now, already we have evidence that public education and higher ed scholarships are going to be targets here in America as they are in autocratic nations everywhere else in the world. Even now, we have evidence that civil liberties will be attacked, that large-scale internments are planned, that press freedoms will be undermined. We have evidence that science will be disregarded in areas as science-focused as public health and climate change. We have evidence that our armed forces and intelligence services will be corrupted. And you know what? We also have evidence that the incoming administration will weaken our alliances and strengthen the regimes in Russia and North Korea. This is alarming stuff, serious stuff. And yet pundits on the left, for God's sake, are talking about whether or not Democrats should throw trans folks under the nearest bus. Seriously? Grow up. Grow up. We know enough about Donald Trump to expect him to create absolute chaos in order to, crack openings for his real agenda. I mean, and this inauguration period where he's trying to fill his cabinet is demonstration of massive chaos. Fly a plane with somebody, I'm going to pick you, forget my transition work. But look, this week, prove that we also know enough to remain steadfast about what matters, to not be fooled anymore by all this chaos. And the folks who did stay focused, they helped derail Trump's effort to install Matt Gaetz, a liar, a sexual predator, and a toady with no respect for the law as our attorney general. Some writers, again, crazy, right? They're saying Gaetz lost and Trump told him to go away. But that's just more nonsense. Mr. Trump was calling senators to lobby for Gaetz. Gaetz was Trump's first major nomination, and Trump couldn't get the votes for his nominee. Hardly a sign of an invincible leader. Focus, and we will get the job done. So to those still writing about, what Democrats could have done, should have done, could do next week, just drop it and get on board. There are going to be a bunch of other cabinet appointments that need your attention. There is going to be actual governing that matters, and you need to focus on it. And look, in fairness, I get it. I'm as deeply invested in protecting our democracy from the Trump threat as anyone. And you guys know this. You've heard me talk about it. I decided in 2016 to devote all my efforts towards strengthening the foundations that were obviously shaken by Trump's first win. That's what sent me to rescue the Sun-Times. I do this radio show once a week. I write, I campaign, I support democracy-focused efforts around the country. I am heartbroken that Trump is back. But I'm also clear-eyed about what lies ahead. Blaming the party out of power will not help us overcome any of it. And those writing it, you're not so smart and you're not so important that we really care that you want to make your mark by blaming the guy who lost. Focus on the real threat, and we just might get through this together. All right, I'm going to take a break, and when we come back, the first of a really fabulous set of guests today, and I'll tell you who the first one is when we come back.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, I just got to ask, David, are you with us? Okay. Well, look, my first guest, I'll start to introduce him. You know him. It's David DeWitt, the editor of the Ohio Capital Journal. And, we got a lot to talk about what happened in Ohio. It was not an example of success, for sure. The right wing did very well in Ohio, knocked off a Democratic senator, and went on to defeat an effort to overcome their gerrymander. But David is with us now, editor-in-chief of the Ohio Capital Journal. And David, welcome back.
Hey, Edwin. Thank you so much for having me on. It's nice to be back.
Before we get into the meat of our discussion, what have you done since the election that's made it possible for you to saddle back up for another round of defending what we love about this country?
Oh, well, luckily for me, my partner planned a trip for us for our birthdays right after the election. So I went to Barcelona, Spain for a week.
That is excellent and head clearing.
That helped a little bit. It helped reset. And honestly, as a journalist, I was working so hard during this election cycle, 60, 70-hour weeks at least. So just being able to step away from the everyday grind for a little bit and get some perspective was helpful as well.
David, I don't hear you as clearly as I am used to hearing. Can you get nearer to your phone?
Yes. Hold on a second.
Don't go away, folks. We're going to just make this easier.
Okay. Is this better?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Sorry about that.
Nope, that's all right. So we are going to need in our country the same kind of political creativity and courage that you saw in the architecture of Antonio Gaudí in Barcelona.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, and that is a lot of creativity and a lot of ingenuity for sure. Gaudí was a great architect from the Spanish modern art music of the architecture of the late 1800s and early 20th century. And his Sagrada Familia Church in Barcelona is an ongoing work. It's still being constructed to this day, 100 years after he died. And it's a beautiful testament to just creativity in architecture.
And to the idea that building something lasting is a generational work. And that goes for our democracy as well. It's going to take all hands, and it's going to take a long time.
Yeah, that's a great point. And perhaps maybe this is a good reminder this election season that the work is never done, and it was never going to be finished, and it is always ongoing. And it's a torch that we pass from generation to carry forward. It's not something that we should ever feel like we could rest on our laurels and be self-satisfied and say our work is done, because it never is. And it goes beyond any of us as an individual.
Well, what do you make of what happened in Ohio? I mean, the state dumped Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown. They failed to break the gerrymander that has so demonstrably hurt people in that state, in the last decade and a half. What do you make of those results?
Yeah, so I think that Ohio obviously went as Trump as ever. In fact, more Trump than ever, with Trump at the top of the ticket instead of him winning by 8 points as he has the last two times. He won by 11 points this time. So he increased his support, and I think that it brought out a lot of people who don't usually vote. I think we saw that pattern continue. He brought out people who are usually a little bit more disconnected from politics, who don't pay attention to politics as much, but they like him and they show up for him. And so in Ohio, he won big. Sherrod was not able to, that was a close. So for instance, Trump won by 11 points. He had a solid 55%. Bernie Moreno won by 50% of the vote compared to 46% for Sherrod. So there's a little bit of a difference there. Meanwhile, you saw the partisan labels on our Ohio Supreme Court races. They followed basically the same, 55% for the Republicans, 45%. So you saw something where all of the residual goodwill that Sherrod has from Ohio workers and people in the communities across Ohio, it was able to buy him a smaller margin, but it wasn't enough to overtake either the Trump enthusiasm in Ohio or the voters who don't show up in governor elections and non-presidential years as much. They really have been showing up for Trump every time he's on the ballot, but not as much in other years. So we now have, the Republicans kept their supermajorities over both houses of the state legislature. They increased their control over the state Supreme Court from 6 to 1. Republicans will now represent both Ohio U.S. Senate seats. The House of Representatives in Congress, the U.S. House of Representatives, those seats all stayed the same, actually. So we've got 5 Democrats and 10 Republicans. None of those. There were 3 Democratic protections there, but all 3 Democrats ended up winning, including Marcy Kaptur. That was a very close race. It came down to the Toledo area there. Came down to 800 votes, according to results as they stand right now. And then the gerrymandering thing went down, and we could talk about that. Ohio has gone through a lot of gerrymandering over the last several decades, and it culminated in the battles of 21 and 2022, where the current redistricting commission refused to draw constitutional maps. And they fought with a bipartisan Ohio Supreme Court majority, and our maps were declared unconstitutional 7 times total for all the different maps. And we were eventually forced to vote under the unconstitutional maps. Finally, they produced bipartisan maps that basically it was the Democrats agreeing to them because Republicans threatened to make them even more gerrymandered if Democrats didn't go along to get along. And so what that resulted in was that Democrats won a couple open seats this year. But I just said Trump represented 55 to 46 in Ohio, around there. Those are the averages. But Republicans control 65% of the Ohio House, 79% of the Ohio Senate. So it's just we're going to continue to be a gerrymandered state, essentially, and we're going to continue to be a Republican-dominated state for the foreseeable future. And that's
we can talk about what that means policy-wise, and I might in a minute. But first, tell me, how does J.D. Vance's Senate seat get filled?
So the process for it is that Ohio Governor Mike DeWitt, who's a Republican, a non-Trumpian Republican, I should point out, he will appoint somebody to finish the next 2 years of that term. And then there will have to be a special election in 2026 to fill out the whole remainder of that term, which goes to 2028. And then there will be another election for that seat, as it would be, because J.D. Vance was elected in 2022 for a 6-year term. So the process is Mike DeWitt appoints somebody. That person wants to run for re-election. They have to do so in 2026. And then if they want to try to keep that seat for a full 6-year term, they have to run for re-election again in 2028. I
see. And are the people already raising their hands?
Yeah, we're seeing some interest for sure. We've got some. Well, first of all, there was a primary this past year with Bernie Moreno, who won the primary, but there were 2 other candidates. So there's State Senator Matt Dolan, who is a Republican in the vein of Mike DeWitt. He's not a Trumpian Republican. I wouldn't call him moderate or centrist, really, but he's much more moderate than what the Trump Republican Party is. He's more of a traditional conservative instead of a zealot reactionary extremist. So there's that. And Mike DeWitt did endorse him in the primary. And then you've got people like U.S. Congressman Mike Carey, who's expressed interest in it. He's a Columbus area Republican. You've got Secretary of State Frank LaRose, who also ran in the Senate primary last year. You've got a couple other possibilities, like if he were to try to want to, there's a governor's race in 2026. Mike DeWitt's term limited. His lieutenant governor is interested in becoming governor. So is the attorney general, Dave Yost. But I feel like from what they've said, neither of them really want to go to the Senate. Dave Yost said that he's an executive. He's not a lawmaker, has never been a lawmaker. I'm pretty sure Houston wants to be governor, and Mike DeWitt has referred to him as he'll make a great next governor. So most likely he's not going to appoint Houston or Yost, but those names have been floated as possibilities. But another thing that DeWitt has said is he wants somebody who can win a primary, in a Republican primary, but he also, wants somebody who I would think aligns with his kind of mentality. I mean, this is one of his last opportunities to put his stamp and legacy on the political future of Ohio. And those two things might be in conflict because he endorsed Matt Dolan, but Matt Dolan wasn't able to win a primary. So I'm very curious where and that's maybe he goes for someone like Mike Carey because of that. I'm not sure. I don't know where DeWitt is going to go. But what I do think that he should do is stick to his own principles as far as what he thinks would make a good senator from his point of view, from his portion of his party. And I think he should let the rest sort itself out. So what I'm saying is I don't think that he should appoint some Trumpist person because that's what he thinks is owed to somebody. I think that he should follow his own principles and appoint someone that he thinks reflects his own principles.
Yeah, that would not be Frank LaRose. Okay, so thank you for that. Let me change the subject a little bit to something I know you know a lot about. Springfield, Ohio. It was the target of MAGA outrage about immigrants. It was the target of all those lies about Asians eating people's pets. Are folks assuming that this will now die down because it was just an election lie? Or are they preparing for mass arrests, internment, deportation, disruption? What are people thinking in Springfield?
Yeah, so the initial reporting that I've seen outside of Springfield after the election win by Trump was that a lot of the Haitian community is making plans to get out of there and run away because they're scared. And remember, these are legal migrants who are there who've been brought in to work in factories where the factories couldn't find any other workers. And so they brought in a lot of these, somewhere between 12 and 15,000 of these Haitian families heard about these opportunities in Springfield. They're looking for factory workers. They've got affordable costs of living, stuff like that. So they all started coming to Springfield to fill these factory work jobs. And then, of course, during the election, J.D. Vance decided to target them with false racist rumors. Donald Trump repeated those during the debate. It all blew up. Springfield ended up getting 33 bomb threats, death threats to public officials, threats of public violence. Elementary schools had to be evacuated 5 days in a row because of repeated threats of violence, all kinds of things. It threw the city into chaos. So now, fast forward, Trump, even at the end of the campaign, was alluding to Springfield and Aurora, Colorado, as his main targets of where he thinks, the country is going to hell. And to be clear, Springfield is a lovely city. It's a very calm, normal, old, industrial Midwest city. It's got great breweries and restaurants. It's perfectly safe and fun and fine. So it's not some hellhole or nightmare landscape that Donald Trump's painting it out to be. It's a very lovely town. Anyway, so it's got 10, 12,000 Haitian immigrants who are now terrified. So the advocates were saying that, the advocates who are helping them adjust and acclimate and assimilate into the community are now helping them buy bus tickets and plane tickets and relocation services to get out of Springfield. What I've heard officially, we haven't heard anything from Trump or Vance specifically about Springfield that I've seen. Bernie Moreno, Senator-elect from Ohio, Bernie Moreno did touch on this the other day in a presser, and he said that temporary status will not be renewed, but they will continue to have it through the end of 2025. And at that point, that's when all of these Haitians would have to be removed. So I guess under that plan, and then the Springfield mayor has said that they'll follow the law, whatever the law is, they'll have to follow the law. So that basically gives the immigrants of Springfield and the factory owners a year to plan to have a mass exodus of workers from their factories and from the city of Springfield over the course of the next year.
Did we ever hear from these factory owners about their employees and the people that, after all, they sponsored for visas so they could come work there? Did we ever hear from them at all about this, or do they support Donald Trump, and are they just eager to have their own workers, people they brought here, deported?
No, we did hear from them during the whole controversy, and they said that these Haitian immigrants were amazing workers who showed up to work on time, who worked hard, who never complained, who did a good job, who contributed to their community and were peaceful and never caused any problems, kind of the ideal workers, according to the factory owners. Now, when they said that, because of the microscope of hate that J.D. Vance trained on the community, those factory workers got death threats from people throughout the country. They had to buy guns and lock their doors and try to protect their families because they were worried that hateful people were going to target them with violence.
The factory owners.
The factory owners, yes, for saying that the Haitian people were good workers. So I don't know how they feel now. I haven't seen recent interviews with the factory owners, but I'm sure that they're trying to figure out how they sustain their businesses when they know that they're going to lose thousands of workers that they had desperately needed and could not find locally before.
Sounds like a really great idea, doesn't it? Wow.
Well, I mean, J.D. Vance says that he wants to, all these small towns in Ohio, how are we, they've been left behind for the last 40 years. Now, I agree with him. And now you have a small town that came up with a plan to rejuvenate its factories and get workers to come to those factories, and they did. And the factories are thriving. The workers are building families and communities. They're assimilating into the community, and they're being reliable workers. They're filling up the churches because Haitians are very religious, and they're opening restaurants and businesses in the town. Now all of that's going to be ripped away and wiped away, right? So what does Springfield do next? They had a plan. They executed the plan. The plan was successful. Now it's all going to be ripped away. So how is J.D. Vance helping these communities? He says he wants to help them. He's hurting them.
So how did Springfield vote?
The city of Springfield is more blue-ish. It's not blue, but the actual city center of Springfield is more purple-blue, right? The outlying areas, the rural areas, are more red.
Yeah. So interesting. Well, I mean, my heart goes out to, first, the people who are here legally working in those mills, who are going to have their lives destroyed, to the owners who brought them here when they couldn't get anybody else, to the folks who did their best to lift, a Midwestern city up, only to see it destroyed in this bonfire of hate. It certainly is. Somebody had to be the first, right, to show the country how destructive these people are. And it may just be Springfield, and your reporting on what goes on there may be the most important, canary in coal mine story for this nation. So
we're going to follow the story. Yeah, we will be following the story and the people of Springfield and what happens, because I feel like as a journalist now, the spot we're in, it kind of reminds me of those months before the anticipation of the overthrow of Roe versus Wade, where the leaked draft came out and you knew that this was coming, right? And you know that when it happens, there's going to be news stories that are heartbreaking that happen that you have to tell, because you know that, it's the same stories that happened before, Roe versus Wade was put in place, and you know that they're coming back. So as a journalist, you begin to prepare for, okay, real people are going to be hurt in real ways, and we need to be prepared to tell their stories and hold this mirror up to our society and let them take a good look at what we're doing to ourselves here, because these are real people with real lives, hopes, fears, dreams, joys, sorrows, families, friends, blood, bone, tears, smiles, all of it, people with full lives, and they're going to have to go through a lot of different stuff. And as journalists, we're going to have to be the ones there who tell their stories and share the consequences. So that includes Springfield. We're going to be doing a lot of good on-the-ground journalism for Springfield. We'll talk to that factory owner in a year, see where he's at. We'll talk to him in 6 months, see where he's at.
Yeah.
And then we also need to talk about the special education people. If they take away the U.S. Department of Education and all these families get thrown into chaos with their special education needs, we need to talk to them. We need to talk to, so we will, as journalists, I think we have an obligation, a critical function to arm the people with the power of knowledge by sharing the stories of what is happening and what comes next.
Well, David, this week the House passed a broad anti-terror financing bill, but in their rush to stop money from going to Hamas, they gave much more power to the government to revoke the tax-exempt status of almost any nonprofit it accuses with very little data of supporting terrorist entities. In the rush, they drafted very few due process rights in this. And belatedly, Congress figured out it would give Mr. Trump the power to destroy any nonprofit he accuses of supporting terror. And at the same time, Trump is demanding that Republicans in Congress kill a bill to protect journalists. Are you guys at States Newsroom doing any planning for how you can protect your organization so the reporting that you're talking about, this reporting that is going to be so essential, is safe?
So I'm not part of the HQ discussions as far as what they're doing or any of that type of stuff. I can tell you that we are reporting on those developments that you're talking about. Our DC bureau has done reporting. We're doing stories. We'll continue to follow them and do stories. But as far as States Newsroom overall, I mean, I can't speak to what they're planning or saying or doing. As far as where I'm at as an editor of one of those States Newsrooms, I intend to continue to do my job for the American people as a member of the Fourth Estate, and that is to arm the public with the power of knowledge, to fearlessly share truth as best as I can figure it out for people, to just keep holding government accountable and doing everything that we can for as long as I possibly can. So I'm not quitting. I'm not being intimidated. I'm just going to keep doing my job as best I can, because I think it's critical that journalists perform to the highest of our abilities right now.
Yeah. Hey, this week I learned for the first time about something called Laura's List, and got on it. This is the States Newsroom newsletter that sort of talks about the things that you guys cover in states all over the country.
Oh, yeah.
You want to tell people how they can get on that? It's really very good.
Yeah, if you go to newsfromthestates.com, you can find all of our we have a reproductive rights newsletter. We have an evening wrap of the stuff that happened during the day. We have a variety of newsletters, but let me just tell everybody a little bit about States Newsroom overall. States Newsroom is now the biggest local government-focused nonprofit news organization in the country. We have more than 200 local reporters, longtime local reporters who have been working for local papers covering their state capitals for their whole careers. We have more than 200 of them in each state capital in all 50 states for States Newsroom or news partnerships covering state government. And why this is so important and why it's so important to us is that we believe that state government is where the real world impacts on people's lives happen the biggest, especially on the issues that matter the most, such as education, such as health care and transportation and roads and infrastructure and all of those issues that are actually kind of intimate to people's lives. And so we have this enormous network of all these different great local reporters keeping an eye on state government. And through this kind of hub and spoke system where we have this headquarters coordinating all of this, you can see all kinds of patterns between legislation and different states and all kinds of overlapping issues where different states from across the nation are experiencing different things that are all interconnected and interrelated. You can get nice overviews of comparisons of states throughout the country. And, of course, you get breaking news of whatever's happening in the state, not from some helicopter-in national reporter, but from somebody who's lived in that state their whole lives and knows it well. So
I think
it's a
fabulous.
Great resource.
It's fabulous. I mean, AP is cutting staff. Local news, which builds trust and community spirit, is vanishing. And up against that, there are organizations like States Newsroom, which you guys are thriving, you're growing, you're doing real fabulous reporting and helping people see what, as you say, the linkages are between what's going on in states. That's partly how we finally figured out, the pay-to-play stuff that was happening all over the country and on the same model from state to state to state. So look, for those of you listening, follow me on Blue Sky, and I will put links to the States Newsroom stuff in there for you. Really important.
Yeah, we have a States Newsroom starter pack on Blue Sky, which is great. Mm-hmm. So you can follow all of the different states. But it's fascinating to me, just as from my own little perch in here in Ohio, when you see how issues really do travel across the state lines and across state borders. And then you see like the same cookie cutter legislation, and you see them testing it out in some states and then trying to bring it to others and stuff. So it helps predict a lot of things as well from, year to year and cycle to cycle, what they might try, where and when. But It's a really good way to stay in touch with the state government, which I think gets overshadowed a lot of time by whatever's happening nationally. But I think state government actually impacts people's lives a lot more.
It does, and it's going to be very important going forward for sure, as it'll be the left now that is raising its hand for states' rights.
Yeah.
But you guys, ALEC, and for those of you who are listening, ALEC, ALEC is a whole different topic. About how right-wing legislation finds its way around the country, but you can practically watch, the sleigh go from state government to state government in these various states' newsroom operations. It's really fabulous.
Well, and here's one other thing that I'll say.
Go ahead.
Just no matter what, I assume the Trump administration will go after the media however they want or whatever, but the state's news, one advantage of just being a bunch of local reporters who have worked in these local states for a long time is that we are not our we have not been warped in any way by being inside the Beltway and trying to get access and play those games and be an insider and use, like promising anonymity so you can let people talk other people behind their backs and lie and manipulate and stuff. Yeah. Like, we really are just like your local hometown newspapers. Like, we're your local reporters. We're the guy that you sit down next to at the bar or the restaurant or something. Like, we are from these states. We are of these states. And I think it just gives us, there's an authenticity to our voice and our work and a sincereness to it that I just think is really important. And I think as people question national media and stuff so much in mainstream media, look to your local reporters, honestly, because these are just regular people just from your community. And I think it's important that when America considers all the propaganda going around and all the distrust of the media and news people, I mean, think about, like, you trust your neighbors to some extent, right? Well, we're your neighbors, you know? So I think that's another thing that I like about States Newsroom. That's all.
I want to go back and explore something that's worried me a little bit. The administration has weakened congressional oversight of what it does, the incoming administration. And, of course, they are weakening protections for journalists. And, well, I think in part because it's promising to be the most corrupt administration the country's ever seen. And I think one of the examples of that corruption is an Ohio example. I mean, can you tell everybody about Trump's top bundler in Ohio, his big fundraiser, a guy named Jeff Verhoff?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, this is Trump's top fundraiser. And he's also taken a guy who is a lobbyist for one of the biggest utilities in Ohio that has been wrapped up for the last 4 years in the largest political bribery and money laundering scandal in state history. And what they did was they funneled officially somewhere between 61 and, if you count up all their various dark money donations, probably close to $70 million in bribes to political machines that then disperse those to friendly lawmakers to pass a $1.3 billion utility bailout for two failing coal plants and First Energy. So a lot's been happening. There were 4 lobbyists charged. The former Ohio Speaker of the House was convicted on his racketeering charges. He's serving 20 years in prison. The former head of the Ohio Republican Party, for his role, is serving 5 years in prison. There were 2 suicides, including the former top utility regulator in Ohio who took a $4 million bribe and was charged with multiple felonies before he died by suicide. Another was a former longtime top lobbyist in the state who is just up to his neck in all of this. He died by suicide. The 2 First Energy executives so far have been charged. There might be more charges against First Energy executives. Meanwhile, cut to this guy, part of the Trump money bundling, money people. He took the fifth in order to avoid incriminating himself during testimony when he was called to testify in these matters. And more than that, Larry Householder, the Ohio House Speaker, who is serving 20 years in prison for racketeering and money laundering and bribery, is banking on Donald Trump giving him a pardon and letting him out of prison for this. Because it was a federally prosecuted case.
Yeah. Well, I think Ohio is a model for what the administration's trying to do. It's serving oligarchs rather than the people. I mean, this bailout that you talked about of First Energy and these coal plants, for God's sake, one of the coal plants wasn't even in Ohio.
No, it was an Indiana one. And I think that's an incredibly important point that you're making, Edwin, because we've seen this on the state level here. But we should remember from the first Trump administration that the Citizens for Ethics group in D.C. found over 3,700 conflicts of interest throughout his administration. As far as this is petty corruption. This is like secretaries, of the cabinet, buying themselves, $10,000 desks and taking private flights to go to their family events and stuff like that. Like just rampant, petty corruption that we had never seen before in administration. That was the first administration. The second one, I imagine, as happens with a lot, and you alluded to this earlier about why they don't like the media, because the media is watchdogs for this type of corruption. A lot of this strong arm, authoritarian concentration of power in one person, it's all to serve greed, mostly. It's all in service to a select amount of people's just unbridled greed. And they just want to get away with all this crazy little petty corruption, and they make each other rich about it, and they think that they're so slick and so smart, and they will corrupt every lever of government that is supposed to stand in their way just so that they can just self-enrich. They just want to get rich on everybody else's back. And meanwhile, they're going to be cutting programs for poor people and special education kids and elderly people, and they're going to be cutting your health care. They're going to be raising prices with their tariffs. But fundamentally, just remember, it's all just a scam. There's going to be a ton of corruption to cover. And Ohio is a great example. We're used to covering corruption, but I'm going to need the public to care because it's your money that they're taking. This is $1.3 billion from Ohio utility customers that they took here in Ohio. This is our money. They don't, but it's the same thing that you see in every regime that comes in that does this. It's just plutocracy, oligarchy, self-enrichment, petty corruption, and it all comes at the expense of the people. So Ohio is an example. I think that we're about to see much more on a much bigger scale.
David, it comes at the expense of the people, but it comes because of the people. I mean, this is what Americans voted for. And not everybody pays attention, as you and I do, to these issues and to how government works. Instead, there is a whose side are you on populism that allows these autocrats to gain power, and then when they're in power, they pass laws that weaken the guardrails. And we've talked about a couple of them already on this show. But Ohioans voted more for Republicans this time than they have in a long time, and that's in part because of the corrupt money washing around in the political system.
Oh, yeah, for sure. After the way that I consider gerrymandering and campaign finance to be the two biggest corruptors of the body politic of America. But you're right, people did vote for this. And I don't know why they're not more offended. I know that, unfortunately, there's a lot of low information voters or people who don't pay attention. And I'm not sure how in this media ecosystem we get them to pay attention until it becomes until they lose their health insurance, until it affects them, until they, actually experience the cuts to programs and the things that they relied on. And when all of that starts to go away, will that be enough to wake them up? I don't know. I don't know anymore.
Well, it's a dangerous
I don't know
time.
what it will take.
AI is very powerful, and it's becoming a thing. And you've guys like Elon Musk who are taking everything everybody's ever done on Twitter and using their AI engines to figure out how to turn it into an enormous propaganda machine. Please, if you're still on Twitter, just know that whatever you think you're getting out of it, Mr. Trump is getting more out of you than you're getting out of that platform, and he's using what he's learning. Yeah,
and I don't. There's such a there's such an avalanche of misinformation and propaganda that comes especially through there, obviously, but through all these different media ecosystems, and media is so fragmented that it's kind of a pick-your-own-adventure game. So between the fragmentation and the propaganda, and then people just wanting to tune out and tap out and not pay attention, but then still they'll vote on their vibes and their feelings anyway, I don't know what the solution is to any of it. All I know is that as an individual journalist, my being is wrapped up in I have to share truth and knowledge with the public as best as I can and just hope that does something. But I can't – it's weird. I care as much as I ever have. I'm as passionate as ever for justice and helping people and sharing truth and knowledge. But to some level, I have to realize that I can't be attached to specific outcomes. I'm going to have to let the world play itself out however it does and just do my best. That's because
you're a real journalist, David. That's what real journalists do. I'm a partisan, you're a journalist, and there's a difference, and it's a good difference. The world needs people who are truth tellers only and who are not as invested in, I'm not saying you're not invested in it, but aren't as invested in the outcome and are more focused on what are the facts and how do we know them. I rely on good journalism every day for what I do. I wouldn't want it any other way. I mean, it would be horrid if left-leaning journalists just thought their job was to be propagandists the way the folks on Fox and Newsmax are. It would be terrible for the country.
Oh, I couldn't. Yeah, I don't know how they look themselves in the mirror, honestly. I mean, and at least try to pretend that they're an actual journalist. I mean, the whole goal of politics, if you've seen the graph of Fox News coverage of inflation after the election, it's fallen off a cliff. They're mentioning inflation like once a day now instead of 300. It's crazy. That's not, that is intentional manipulation of your audience for a political end. And it's disgusting to me, but what are you going to do? That's just, there's so much money to be made in it. They're so greedy. And
I think Fox is in trouble, David. I think Fox is in trouble. I think everybody on cable is in trouble. Technology's changed. Twitter is, and I think I said Trump when I meant Musk earlier. Twitter is a bigger threat than Fox now, for sure. And, it's just interesting. Technology has changed. Consumer habits. But what happens to Fox still echoes around the echo chamber. But I think we have to not fight last year's battle as we end up with a different one coming ahead.
Yeah, and to your point, like to try to strike a little optimistic tone as our time winds down to an end here, you just said we beat them, right? And I want everybody to remember, as Republicans claim this sweeping, unprecedented, historical mandate, which is all nonsense and bull. He didn't even win a majority. It looks like he's going to get under 50%. That's not a sweeping mandate. And as Democrats tear their hair and gnash their teeth and run around the room screaming at each other, pointing fingers of blame in every direction, left to center, center to left, all of it. Remember, it's 250,000 voters in 3 states, essentially, who decided this election. It's not – and a lot of what comes next, as long as the pillars of democracy actually are able to be defended, and I think that's got to be key for a lot of people, and there's a lot of people working on that, there's going to be a midterm election in 2 years. And then there's going to be another election in 4 years. And as long as everybody fights for that, it's like the Howard Zinn line, millions of people making small decisions every day will make a difference. I just don't want to see people throw up their hands in disgust and walk away and join the masses of the apathetic and the indifferent, because there's so much work to do. And there's so much good work to do, and the margins aren't that big. And I really think that a lot of this, when the rubber hits the road and they see, and we end up having to report the stories of the hurt that's coming, there could very well. I mean, think of this. The Democrats in 2004 were losing their minds like they would never win an election again. And then 2008 happened 4 years later.
Yep. David, that's got to be our last word. We've run out of time. But thank you, as always. It's great to catch up. It's great that you are refreshed and back ready for another round of telling the truth about what's going on in Ohio and the country. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, as ever, for having me on, Edwin. Thank you.
All right.
Always happy to.
All right, we're going to take a break for the news, everybody, and try and follow up something as good as David DeWitt with Michael Tomasky from the New Republic when we come back.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody, a little after 2 o'clock here in the upper Midwest, and boy, I am so lucky to be joined today by Michael Tomasky, who's the editor-in-chief of the New Republic, and he is as thoughtful today as he was before the election delivered shocks to our collective cerebellum. Michael, welcome back.
Well, thanks for having me. It's nice of you to say. I should tell everybody that I got this election wrong.
Yeah, you and everybody else. So
you do sometimes. Well, not everybody, but anyway, a lot of us. But there you are. Just thought I should admit it.
Yeah, I got it wrong too. Can I start in an unusual place? And maybe I'm skipping a couple of steps, but this election, proved that right-wing propaganda, certainly not the mainstream media, but what right-wing propaganda is the dominant force in shaping America's perceptions. I think it's a social force as much as it is a information, disinformation source. But that means, among other things, that the burden, I guess, as well as the opportunity for the New Republic and other truth tellers just got vastly larger. So how are you thinking about this?
Yes. Well, first of all, I agree with you, unsurprisingly, and I wrote a piece to this effect a couple weeks ago, and it's probably the most read piece I've written in my 3+ years, nearly 4 years at the New Republic. And I've done a lot of shows to talk about it, and I said essentially what you just said, that I've been watching the right-wing media grow from a few talk radio hosts in the early 1990s to what it is today, which is not just Fox News. When we say right-wing media, we think of Fox News. But people should understand there are other cable networks. There's One American News. There's Newsmax. There's Sinclair, a vast network of radio and local television stations, and to some extent newspapers. There's a vast network of right-wing talk radio stations, a couple of large networks of Christian talk radio stations, and then on top of that, there's all the podcasts and TikTokers and YouTubers where the right is generally ahead of the left, and more people get their news from those sources these days than they do from traditional media sources. So we crossed a Rubicon, Edwin, in this election. This is the first election in American history where the right-wing media was bigger and more influential than the mainstream media. And people really need to understand that. Now, were people voting on inflation? Of course they were. And were they voting on, to some extent, the border and some other issues? Sure, of course they were. If the conversation is about voters' motivations, nobody goes into the booth thinking, oh, my thinking has been so influenced by the right-wing media that I guess I'll vote for Trump. That's not the argument. But the argument is that is the broader context in which we Americans receive our information, and it really colors absolutely everything. So it's a dangerous point. It's an opportunity for a place like the New Republic, I guess. It is, and and we'll do our best to seize it. But it's a real problem for our society and our democracy.
I mean, it isn't just that they have now more voices, louder voices, but they control the technology that they control the algorithms for who gets to see what. And that is, I mean, there used to be laws that said that one company couldn't own, both major newspapers in a city. How quaint.
Yeah.
How old-fashioned, right?
Yeah.
But instead, Elon Musk can now say, I'm going to buy MSNBC and add it to my propaganda network.
Yeah. And that is a particularly chilling thought. And, if that were to happen. But it's indicative of another point that I made in this piece that I wrote a couple weeks ago, which is, don't think that because they're now at parity or slightly above parity, that these right-wing forces will be happy with that. No, they want complete domination. Viktor Orban spoke to the CPAC conference 2 years ago, and he said the most important thing, have your own media. It's what we need to combat, the leftist propaganda. And this has been a project of rich people on the right for many, many, many years. And rich people on the left haven't been paying attention. And so we are where we are. And I can foresee a time in 10 or 15 years in this country where in about 75 or 80% of it, nobody's even exposed to, forget liberal media, just mainstream media.
Well, I mean, when you say that, what I hear is the thing that people are exposed to is government propaganda, one-party propaganda.
Yeah.
And that is terrifying, absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
And it's not just terrifying in terms of our democracy, it's terrifying in terms of our society, because America is so vibrant in its play of ideas. And if ideas now, if we adopt an orthodoxy and enforce it through all of our media, we just lose that thing that has so benefited us in every imaginable field of creativity and science and technology, in economics, as well as in government.
It's so true. And so, we'll see. I mean, you mentioned all these other realms. We'll see what sort of assault on science this incoming Trump administration launches. So it's not just a question of their policies per se. It's a question of a tone that is set and that asserts itself in many different aspects of American life.
I'm tempted to talk to you about some of the policies they have on offer. But before I go there, I just want to, the incoming administration is already, I think, on track to be the most corrupt we've ever had. They've already not signed the things they need to sign to make sure there are no conflicts of interest. They don't want to sign it. They are rejoicing in conflicting interests. Elon Musk somehow being the largest one of the largest military contractors and being in charge of what the government spends is an enormous self-dealing conflict of interest that you usually see in oligarch countries. And I that should just be the biggest warning flag of all.
Well, it should be, but they do so much along these lines, and it's so overwhelming that you just can't keep up. You just can't keep up, and you can't prioritize where your outrage should go. Pam Bondi, she's qualified on paper in the sense that Matt Gaetz was not. But she withdrew an investigation into Trump University after Trump donated $25,000 to a PAC that helped her. No charges were ever pressed. It was looked into, and no charges were pressed. But, that's really not the bar we ought to be going for here for the chief law enforcement officer of the United States. She dropped an investigation after getting a political donation. That, in a more, as you say, quaint time, that would have been a huge controversy. As I wrote yesterday, today it's jaywalking.
Yeah, well, it isn't. And I'm not, you and I can keep raising it and reminding everyone that we all lose when we get rid of these guardrails. I mean, I wonder how investors are going to feel when Trump's friends get a sneak peek at the monthly jobs numbers before the rest of the country does and can invest accordingly, right? I mean, all of this stuff goes to destroying the systems that we put in place that have allowed many of Trump's supporters to make the money they made.
Yeah, and just the way he has smashed these norms, the way he smashed them in late 2016 and early 2017 by not putting his the businesses in a blind trust, and by setting up this system, however he managed to set it up, where all these supplicants from the Gulf states and all these other places had to come stay at his hotel. Mm-hmm. Boy, that's something that this is small potatoes in the scheme of things, but that Waldorf Astoria, which used to be the Trump Hotel, is kind of a nice place to get a drink in Washington. I hope it doesn't go back to being a Trump hotel.
Well, so the biggest line of defense should be the rule of law. The rule of law is in the hands of a Supreme Court that says the 14th Amendment does not apply to the potential insurrection of Donald Trump. The Emoluments Clause doesn't really exist. The shortest article in the Bill of Rights, which is, I think, 14 words about the right to bear arms, the first 8 words about it having something to do with a well-regulated militia don't exist. So, I mean, we are mistaken if we think some of the biggest institutions that are there to protect the rule of law will do so.
I'm afraid you're right. I mean, the Supreme Court's immunity ruling, I have a feeling, is going to loom awfully large over these next 4 years, right? I mean, there's this law called the Insurrection Act, which I know you know, and I'm sure many of your listeners know, and it dates to the 18th century, and it's vaguely written, and there's amendment piled on amendment, and, it's never really been tested in the sense that we've never had a president who has said, I am invoking the Insurrection Act to go arrest X people, okay? We've never had a president who has said that. Now we have a president who's completely capable of doing that, and I would expect will do that. It could be to arrest you, or it could be to shut down the New York Times. And I have to assume that the Supreme Court will say, well, it was an official act, so he has immunity from prosecution. He can do it.
They were tested. They agreed he'd have the right to send SEAL 16 to kill somebody.
Right.
This is right. They're so we have to. I mean, I expect that Donald Trump will do things that cross lines and Americans won't go there. I think I know people who voted for Donald Trump who are not MAGA. They bought some of the propaganda. They don't really remember what he did when he was here 4 years ago. They don't remember his handling of COVID. They sort of think he was unappealing, but, for whatever reason, they were more comfortable with him. But I don't think that they voted for, and, he barely won, the kind of chaos he's about to bring us.
Yeah, I don't either. I know a couple such people too, and they've always been the most mysterious to me. I understand MAGA heads, Actually. I mean, obviously, I don't agree with their view of the world. But sure, I can understand why some people find that cocktail that he's serving up to be tasty. I have a little more trouble understanding the people in the middle who don't see him as a unique figure, either threat or in alluring terms. You know what I mean? At least people like you and I and the MAGA people at least have in common that we recognize Trump's uniqueness.
That's right.
Then there are these people in the middle for whom he's kind of just another politician, a little more so. But, he's no different, really. They don't think of him as sui generis or unique from who Joe Biden is or Barack Obama or Mitt Romney is. It sort of blows my mind. But I've been trying to think about that a lot.
Yeah, it's an unthinkable thought. And you can think it and I can think it because we spend so much time studying this. And these other guys have the luxury, really, of thinking about other things. And thank God they do. I mean, who would get to go to a movie if everybody spent all their time doing what you and I do, right? Who would write the movies? Exactly. Who would write the books? Who would, I mean, it turns out people do other things, but they really, in something as important as this, you kind of want them to check in a little more. I mean, the two biggest private prison companies saw an 80% gain in their share price in the week after the election. This is in anticipation of building a Trump gulag system throughout America, right? And in no way, when that happens, are Americans going to rejoice. Oh, you're trying to cut the government, but you're spending billions on an internal prison system? I don't see that computing with anybody.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, it will compute with his backers, but these voters that we're talking about in the middle who decided to vote for him for the reasons you described a couple minutes ago, I hope that will surprise them and chagrin them and make them think twice.
Yeah, like the shooting of those little girls in a Baptist church did 50 years ago. Yeah. I think it was.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, we did see, it was kind of darkly amusing that searches for "can I change my vote," spiked in the days after the election.
Oh, wait, Project 2025 is a real thing? I thought they said it wasn't. Yeah.
Right.
How about killing the Department of Education? I mean, Title I funding for low-income students zeroed out, I guess. Data collection and analysis, so we know whether students are doing better or worse, gone. Student loans, who knows how that's going to work. And, I know they think, Pell Grants, that's just like for poor black kids. And it is, but most of them are poor white kids. So, again, it's like, you talk government all you want. I mean, I don't get Obamacare. I'm on the ACA.
Yeah, I know. That's been an unbelievable one, too.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Are Americans going to be comfortable with the end, of a fight against climate change?
Well, that's a longer-term thing, that people or maybe don't recognize so much. But we know that car companies are telling the administration, don't shift us away from EVs. We've invested billions of dollars in this technology. We're down that road, and we all want to keep heading down that road. And so I think even if they don't hear from Americans, I think they'll hear from private enterprise that, the greening of the economy is a good and potentially profitable thing, in addition to being, environmentally good.
So you're raising something that I've thought about, but I can't yet get my head around. You can help me. And it is the paradox that Donald Trump has created for himself. His own voters mostly don't believe him. They took his talk of like dictatorship and locking up his adversaries and deporting, millions as more signaling than actually policy statements. And Trump might even know this. But the folks he's now bringing into his government, they are deadly serious about implementing it. Because he said, yeah, I'm not ready. Like, he's outsourcing his administration to the Heritage Foundation like he outsourced the judiciary to the Federalist Society. So he's stuck now. Either he lets down this base that actually wants him to do these awful things, or he does them and the great majority of Americans revolt. Either way, he's a lame duck who's going to fail fast, I think.
Yeah, well, it is true that he's a lame duck, and that's something that I hadn't given the proper consideration to before. But that's going to be an interesting aspect of all this when you know he can't run for president, and you know that Vance is supposed to be his heir apparent.
Yeah. Well,
what's that going to? I mean, the rumor one hears. You may have heard this. Maybe I shouldn't be trafficking in rumors on radio, but I don't know. Vance Don Jr. in 2028.
Okay.
I mean,
I'm just starting to feel better on that. That is no help.
Sorry. Like I said, it's just a rumor. Who knows?
Right. Like his daughter-in-law is going to be the senator from Florida. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
banana republic at large.
Yeah. Well, it's not impossible. Anyway, there's going to be a certain amount of tension maybe between Trump, who wants to do all these things and get them done because that's his agenda, and Vance, who is going to be thinking more about 2028.
Yeah.
That might be.
What do you think of so Mitch McConnell, is still pretty savvy and dangerous, and he took the chairmanship of the Rules Committee. Again, paradoxically, I was delighted, because that seems to say to me that he is not about to let the prerogative of the Senate be completely undermined by an autocrat who wants no other sources of power in the country. How did you read that?
Yeah, the same way, I guess. The Senate Rules Committee isn't, in general, as powerful as the House Rules Committee, but it's powerful enough, and he knows the rules. He knows what strings to pull, and I think you're probably right about that. And the rejection of Gates showed that maybe there's some occasional backbone among the Republicans in the Senate.
Well, but again, this is where guys like you beat that right-wing propaganda machine and help put a lot of pressure on. On Fox, they didn't talk about anything wrong with Gates. They love him,
right?
Plastic surgery and all. They think he's a great guy.
Yeah.
But we beat him in part because we stopped, navel gazing and went out and said, look, this man should not have this job. He's unfit for it. And I think Pam Bondi is going to be, you guys wrote about this. She should have a very, very significant vetting in a hearing. Even if the Republicans pass her, they're going to pay a price for passing her.
Yeah, this was a really good piece by my colleague Greg Sargent that appeared yesterday, maybe this morning.
This morning, I think. I saw it this morning. I thought it was great.
Yeah, just this morning. Yeah, thanks. Where he said, look, Democrats may not be able to block Pam Bondi from being confirmed, but they can take her confirmation hearings and lay down some very serious markers about things that they're going to keep an eye on her about, and they should do that with all these people. These hearings will be, of course, next year, next February and March, so they have plenty of time to prepare and plenty of time to know what to make the public aware of about these folks.
And Michael, the fact that there will actually be hearings, when again Trump demanded that it all be recess appointments and there would be no hearings, is another defeat for Mr. Trump and his efforts to start his time in office with no one willing to hold him to account to anything.
Right. So, maybe all is not lost, but boy, it's going to be
I think that it's going to be a dangerous time, and people are going to get hurt. I think with great reporting, and you guys do great reporting, and everybody, as I've told you before, please get the New Republic. You need to know what's going on in order to have this fight. We need to protect the institutions of the democracy, and we need to protect the civil society from the, there's an adjective I'm looking for to describe this propaganda. It's this faux nativist, faux patriotic propaganda that says it has the backs of workers when it really is just sitting on those backs. You guys write about this with clarity and smart, and people just need to know that's how we're going to win.
That's right. And, I heard the tail end of your guest before me, who was a little bit more upbeat than I have been, so I'm going to try to end on that note. 2 years is a long time, and he can do a lot of damage, but looked at another way, it's not that far away. History suggests that the Democrats should pick up 27 seats. That's the average since post-World War II era, I think. So, the Democrats should have a reasonable shot at taking back the House of Representatives. Then their presidential candidates will start running around, and they have good ones. We all, I think, regret that we didn't have a real primary this year with Gretchen Whitmer and Josh Shapiro and whoever else. But we'll have that next time, and we'll see. I mean, as devastating as the election was, it was close, and the Democrats don't need to, quote unquote, win the working class. They need to claw back a certain percentage of the working class. This black and Latino shift, particularly among men, is very disturbing. Is it sui generis to Trump, or is it a historical trend? We don't know that yet. And the Democrats have some thinking and soul searching to do about that, for sure. But it's not like this was 1984. This wasn't some landslide. It's just not remotely like that.
Yep.
By which I'm not. That's not an Orwell reference. That's a literal reference to the 1984.
Yes, to a year. Yes.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
That's how I took it. Yeah. All right. Well, Michael, thank you as always for your wisdom and your work and the time you spend with us. I really appreciate it.
Well, likewise, and I'll come on anytime, as you know. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a break and I guess go from the New Republic to the Philadelphia Inquirer and Will Bunch when we come back.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, Will Bunch, the Philadelphia Inquirer's national columnist, is back with us. Will's doing something, odd. He's getting better every time he writes. It's just an amazing thing. And I give him enormous credit for it, although a little bit of me thinks it's because our world is getting crazier and giving him better material. Will, welcome back.
Edwin, thanks so much. That's a very kind thing to say. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I mean that might be a part of it. It's like a sign of the times, I mean, it's funny, I think, after Trump was elected or reelected or whatever on November 5th, I mean, my gut feelings were pretty much no different than all of the folks out there listening, which was I was just kind of numb, I felt, I mean, the way I put it on social media was, that I felt dead and I felt dead inside. But, for me, writing is kind of a way to keep going. It's like, all right, you feel numb, but you've got to try and make sense of this, and like, which is good. Gives you kind of a mission right off the bat. So So throw myself into covering this. It's hard right now because it's, these cabinet picks, all, as we all know, I mean, there's just been so many like insane or irrational, or I don't even know the right language anymore, but, so many picks that are just, wildly inappropriate. And, there's kind of the issue of, do you deal with each one? Do you take them seriously? I mean, I've tried to take a step back and look at what he's doing, like big picture, and why is he doing it this way, as opposed to the alternative of just kind of microanalyzing each nominee. But that said, I'm writing a column tomorrow, and I'm probably gonna somewhat microanalyze Pam Bondi, this pick for Attorney General, because I think there's a lot of problems there that haven't really been scrutinized closely enough. But but it's but we're all feeling our way through this. What's the best way to fight back? What are the vulnerabilities? Where can I make a difference? I think that's the question a lot of people are really asking themselves, right? So.
Yeah. Well, so just on your point about, do we treat this the group phenomena or the individual phenomena? The scholars of autocracy talk about the group phenomena. Why would somebody appoint a group that is patently, unqualified and terrible? And they give reasons for it. This is what autocrats do in order to destroy the government, so that competence doesn't matter. It's chaos. It's what they do. But the structure of government is such that we have to beat each one individually in a hearing. So we have to do both. We have to do both.
Yeah,
and we did with Gates. Yeah.
Right, right. I was just going to say, I'm not making a very original point at this case, but I think, I think the first reaction is, oh my gosh, does Trump think that he's invulnerable? Is he going to get every one of these picks? And does he have a plan for ramming all these picks through? And if there's a takeaway from the Gates experience, it's like, no, he's not invulnerable. He's not, there's being an authoritarian, and then there's being, infallible, like the Pope or something, or I don't know, or like the theoretical Pope, and this showed that he's not. But I think, just quickly to your point, and I think the big picture, because I think you're right about destroying the government, but I think it's even bigger than that. I think he's also trying to destroy our sense of what's even real. It's like, because when you watch these picks coming, Tulsi Gabbard, and RFK and Dr. Oz, and you're thinking, oh my God, how can this even be real? And he wants to kind of create that aura, that it's like Trump's. I mean, he wants to create this aura that it's Trump's world and we're living in it, and he wants to demoralize you. It's like, this is so crazy that I just feel overwhelmed and kind of hopeless by all of this, which is exactly what he wants you to feel. So the challenge for us is to find the ways that we can feel like we're doing something, and the ways that there is hope, because there's always hope, So.
I agree. He is not succeeding in demoralizing me. I think his honeymoon is already almost over, and it'll be the shortest one in American history. He's a lame duck. His own party is going to go after him soon enough. He's in this trap, Will, where his government is going to be filled with people who want to do the worst possible things. They are, after all, already been vetted by the Heritage Foundation as part of Project 2025. He's outsourced his staffing to them, like he outsourced his judiciary to the Federalist Society. And yet most Americans really don't want that stuff. So it's going to be painful. It's going to be terrible, but it'll be over. And then after that, I hope we are strong enough. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a little worried about these health-related appointments because they seem so inappropriate and counterproductive. And, we we just lived through the nightmare of having a pandemic, and heaven forbid there was another, maybe not exactly like COVID, but any kind of public health emergency.
Because Trump did such a good job with the last one. Yeah.
Yeah, but this just seems. But think about it though, because Trump did a pretty terrible job with the last one, and he had people like Anthony Fauci working with him, and now there's no Fauci, right? That may literally be if they arrest him and put him in jail, which seems like what they want to do. But there's nobody like that, and that to me that's it's hard. I don't think you can say just, I'm thinking we're going to muddle through 4 years, because that may not be the case either. It's like, you have to live day by day, every day, because if you think you know what's going to happen next, you probably don't. So,
Will, some people don't have that luxury. I'm thinking of at the beginning of this show, I talked to a reporter from Ohio, terrific guy, and he said, "Look, in Springfield, Ohio, where J.D. Vance and Donald Trump lied about the Haitian immigrants and what they're doing to the town, they are all preparing to leave. They don't know where they're going to go. They got visas. They're not there illegally. They got visas and are sponsored by the factory owners in the town, and they've come to work there. Those factories will lose their employees. They don't want to do that. They spoke out in favor of them and got death threats. Those Haitians are going to lose their visas and have to go back to a collapsing state in Haiti. And Ohio is going to suffer from the loss of the productivity that they brought to these plants. These are real consequences that are going to hurt people fast. And I don't think we can protect everybody.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's. I'm glad to hear that you did a segment on that, because I think that's a classic example of a situation that's it's going to happen. Like you said, some parts of that are happening already. But when Trump says that he's going to revoke the humanitarian parole, that's the condition that keeps a lot of people here legally. Yeah, I have. That's one thing. I have no doubt that he's going to do that. There's nothing. That's right. It doesn't require Congress or anything like that. He can just do it. And so these people are going to be put on a plane and sent back to one of the most dangerous places on earth. Where some of them are going to be exposed to violence. They're more susceptible because they're known to have left the country and now they're back, and people will probably die. But and here back home, like as you said, the impact on the Ohio economy will be a negative one, and the question then is, are people going to care, right? Is like are the everyday voters in Ohio that were Trump got I don't know exactly, but over 55% of the vote probably.
He did.
Are those voters going to be upset, or are they going to have a moment of realization? Or probably it would take a bunch of those to hapen, right? Not just one.
They come in groups.
Things. But, yeah, but but we're seeing, I wrote my most recent column about, what's happening with our transgender community, and
I wanted to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
You wrote about the war on transgender. Hey, let me just set this up this way. I looked at the research after I read your article, and the best estimates are that there between 0.5% and 1.5% of American population identify as transgender. It's a tiny thing that has turned our politics upside down. And it is a strategy of weaponizing
it is
decency.
and it isn't, though. Yeah, I mean, I would just point out that there's two ways to look at it. Like percentage-wise, you could say, well, because because it's been a little bit more socially acceptable for youth to express themselves on this issue, that the number among younger people is over 1%. But I think among adults, like you said, I think the number is about half of 1%. You say, oh, my God, we're having this big discussion over half of 1%. Well, this is also a country of, over 200 million adults, right? So, simple math, 0.05% of 200 million is a million. So you're talking about a million people. So, we were just talking about COVID a minute ago. We all agree that COVID was a national tragedy because, a million people died, right? And now we're talking about a million people who are going to be losing rights because if they can't use public accommodations, if they can't participate in other activities, they're being singled out. They're being tattooed in a way as being different than the rest of us, and a million people is a lot of people to be othered like that. So I think it's a significant number of people who are going to be affected, and but it's another community. I mean, you mentioned Springfield. Here's a community people are saying, what do I need to do between now and January 20th? Like, I was hoping to get my name legally changed. I was scheduled to get gender affirming surgery or some other type of gender affirming health care. Do I need to rush and go ahead with this before January 20th, 2025? What other types of bad things are going to happen to me? I mean, this is real, and this is something where, assuming that you're not part of the transgender community, people need to speak up. They need to stand up for the people that they know, and that friends or family members who are directly affected by this. And to me, I mean, what inspired me to write about it was reading these debates within the Democratic Party of, these ads. And I think there is pretty strong empirical evidence that these ads affected some voters, and maybe enough in these swing states to even swing a couple of these states, right? The Democrats didn't have a good response in real time, and they don't seem to know how to respond now. And the reason I wrote about it, and my basic response is, well, just start by affirming their humanity. Just start with the basic. Look at the example of Andy Beshear in Kentucky. He vetoed these bills. He knew they were going to be overridden, so he could have easily just signed them and, said nothing. But, he made a stand. He vetoed these bills, knowing he was running in the middle of running for re-election in one of the cases. And he came out and he said, look, I believe that we're all God's children, including these children, and I'm not going to let them be hurt by this legislation like this. And enough, and I'm sure there's a few bigots out there who didn't like hearing that, but enough voters respected that and respected his moral stance on this issue that he was reelected, and that's his advice for the rest of us on how to. And look, I'm not an expert on all the nuances of transgender law, right? And so I'm not gonna go out there and say the solution for transgender girls playing in girls sports is X, because it's complicated. Because there's gender and there's also biology, which are not, it's a Venn diagram, but they don't always overlap, right? So that's got to be worked out. But I think my point is, we've worked out a lot of issues around people's rights, but we weren't able to work them out until we started with a place of humanity and respect, and you got to start from that place.
No, Donald Trump and his guys weaponize common decency. They attack whoever they think is weak and unpopular, and hope that Democrats will rise to their defense so that they can then say, well, they want everybody to be transgender or everybody to be Haitian or whatever it is it's all BS. We should be able to be decent without our decency being treated against us. And we have to be stronger about saying, you do not get to weaponize decency. You do not get to say hate your neighbor.
In my kind of broader, I don't know, call it a political point or whatever, is I think ultimately voters respond not so much to your individual actions on X or Y, but they respond to your to use an overused term, they kind of respond to your brand, right? What are you, the Democratic Party, really at the end of the day all about? And the thing is, we all criticize the Democratic Party all the time. I do it I do it a lot myself, But the truth is, for all its flaws, the Democratic Party, when LBJ signed those two civil rights bills in the '60s, or when the Democratic Party was the party that supported the ERA or other women's equality members, or when you go out there and you see which party is appointing women to open judicial seats, or which party is appointing Asian Americans and Latinos and African Americans when there's an open seat on the judiciary, and it's not the Republicans, it's always the Democrats. And you know what, people that became a brand, for want of a better word, that became. Don't call it a brand. Call it their moral identity, right? For the Democratic Party. And look, we're always talking about their failures, but the truth is, in 7 out of the last 9 elections, and when I say 7 out of the last 9, I'm including this, unfortunate outcome earlier this month. 7 out of 9 elections, more Americans have voted for the Democratic Party for president than the Republicans, and it's because of that brand. It's because of that brand. It's because which is the party of civil rights, which is the party of modernity, right? The modern idea of a multiracial democracy, and it's the Democrats, not the Republicans. For all the dumb strategic things the Democrats do, for all the too much sucking up the corporations, for all the embrace of academic talk that maybe puts off some voters, all those day-to-day mistakes that they make. At the end of the day, one party is the party of civil rights and equality and diversity, and one party isn't. And the thing is, if you start taking the bait from Trump and these people, and if you say, well, this transgender community, it's only a few people, we can kind of sell them out because we need to win so we can help all the other people. That may seem like a strategy, but it just doesn't work.
No,
it doesn't
we
work.
Can't sell anybody out. That's not what we do.
No.
It's not what we do. Hey, we got 2.5 minutes, and I just want to ask you one other question. Because you and my bride, Jennifer Schulze, spend a lot of time thinking about the media in America. Do you think what used to be the mainstream media can recover from the massive loss of trust they brought upon themselves in this cycle?
Well, they could. I mean, I think there has to be some massive reinvention, and when I say reinvention, I would mean that on a couple different levels. I mean, both in terms of, again, to use the same concept, but again, what's the media's brand, right? What does the media stand for? What are their moral values? Are they a party, that's committed to giving this kind of balanced approach that it isn't really balanced, but they believe it is? Or are they going to be a party that uses journalism as a way to defend democracy? I mean that's the bigger picture. But then there's the other picture, which is how do they do a better job of reaching people where they are? Because not only have we known for a long time that people aren't picking up printed newspaper at their doorstep, but now we're in a world where people aren't going to the homepage of a large, mainstream news organization either. They're getting their information from other places. Yeah, so it's a matter of reinventing the mission and then also reinventing the methods of reaching people. So can that be done? Yeah, it can be done. It'll probably be done by it's probably going to be done by disruptor type people and not by the New York Times or the Washington Post, at least not at first, but hopefully those disruptors are out there and they're getting to work. Look, I'll say real quick, look at what a big problem Elon Musk's takeover of X turned out to be. And it turned out there was a solution. There's a blue sky. It's a site that recreates a lot of the conditions where you can have a positive, progressive conversation.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, a little after 3 o'clock now here in Chicago, and I'm joined again by Jill Lawrence, one of the very last people we talked to on this show before the last election. And Jill is, of course, a columnist, author. You can read her work in The Bulwark and elsewhere. Jill, I apologize. I was wrong.
That's okay, Edwin. I never believed you anyway. It was a jump ball, right? Anything could have happened, and everything did.
Yeah, it was a very close election, and I'm sure we'll hear about the landslide and the mandate, but it was a very, very, very close election where Democrats actually outperformed what you would expect when you have a president whose approval ratings underwater, and the right track, wrong track numbers were as bad as they were.
I'm not going to say it was an easy election. It took me about 10 days to kind of dig out of the despair, but I'm back.
Well, the funny thing is that America is, so preternaturally optimistic that today, in the break, I just heard, the news. And on the news, it says there's a poll that says like 53% of Americans think Donald Trump's going to be great. But that always happens right after an election. Americans sort of, whoever you voted for, go, yeah, it's going to be okay. We're going to be okay. And I think we're going to be okay, but not because of Donald Trump, who's off to the most chaotic. He was always going to be chaotic, but the most chaotic start I've ever seen. Let's just talk about the chaos cabinet that he's attempting to form.
Well, I think of it like a game of whack-a-mole because every time, you think we've knocked down the Matt Gaetz nomination, and so who's next? And I was trying to figure out who should be next, and there's a three-way tie for second place. I saw something on social media by a poster called T-Pain, and it was like, Trump, I'm ready for my next cabinet pick. Aide, shall I get the sex offender list or the Russian asset list? And, it's kind of like, okay, that's a little too on the nose. I mean, it was perfect. I've just never seen anything like this. I mean, even the latest person, Linda McMahon, nominated to lead the education department, which, Trump would like to send to extinction, was sued for enabling sexual abuse of kids recently. I not abusing them, but knowing about it. This was when she was with the World Wrestling Entertainment Group. But I it's like, and then you've got Robert Kennedy Jr., who, not only accused of groping his teenage babysitter, but also, is going to bring back measles and polio and COVID, whatever you can think of. He's against vaccines. And then, of course, there's Pete Hegseth, the Fox News Pentagon nominee. There's a lot of documentation of all kinds of sleazy behavior, and then the most recent thing is a police report about an assault he was accused of, a sexual assault in California, and apparently I'm seeing that the Trump people didn't even know about this. So
it says two things to me, and you left Pam Bondi out. We can get to her too. The administration is demonstrating at the very beginning that it is just the whims of Donald Trump that matter, and none of the work that administrations, that any bureaucracy does, whether it's a corporate entity or anything else. It takes a lot of people to do a lot of work to get something done well. And if it's just who's sitting next to me on the plane, I'll nominate, I don't know, the dog-killing governor of North Carolina, of North Dakota.
South Dakota, yeah, right.
Third time's a charm. Yeah, sorry. He appointed a chief, someone who's going to be his chief of staff, but she doesn't know who he's appointing. They're not going through vetting. So people, qualifications don't matter. Fitness doesn't matter. Judgment and character I think they do matter. If you have good judgment and good character, you are not allowed to have the job. So,
no, that's essentially, I actually wrote about that in a piece about the team of outlaws. He's just looking for a cabinet, that looks just like Donald Trump. So we can normalize this type of, criminality and cronyism and corruption. I mean, it's just astonishing. I mean, it's not astonishing. We knew this would happen, but what's astonishing is so many Americans didn't get what would happen. I mean, you have, people pretending they're in government, like this Department of Government Efficiency, co-chaired or co-led by Vivek Ramaswamy, who's saying things like, I have an idea for how we can really reduce the government. We just fire everybody whose Social Security number ends in an odd number. I mean,
right. So, and it's not a government department. I mean, they keep calling it the Department of Government Efficiency. It's not a government department. They don't get to make up government departments. Congress has to create them. It's just another. But lucky for them, it isn't, because now there's no ethics rules. So you have the biggest one of the biggest defense contractors in charge of whose defense budget gets cut. Oh, conflict, sure. Old
He's
school
also in charge of. He also is in charge of who gets silver medallions on his social media on X. We're talking about Elon Musk, and so he gave the silver medallions are for official government agencies, and he gave his own essentially toothless deficit commission type panel a silver medallion, pretending it's a real government department. So there.
Is there a law against impersonating a government agency?
I don't know. Well, here's
not that anybody would enforce it. It's a question for Pam Bondi. You can ask Pam Bondi in her hearings. Yeah, if somebody impersonates and tells Americans they are a government agency and they're not, what will you do about it?
She'll say, I'll ask Donald Trump what he thinks, and whatever he thinks, that's what I'll do. this is what we've got.
She can say that. I don't think she's going to do that in her confirmation hearing. I think they're going to lie, like they always do, and pretend that it's normal.
She has actual, I saw her nomination or pick, I guess. He can't nominate anybody. And so I never call these things nominations, or if I do, I put quote marks around them. He is not the president. He can't nominate anyone. He picked her, and I thought, well, at least she's been a state attorney general. She has some experience with this. But, she's an election denier. She went around the country and claimed fraud after the 2020 election. Now, I saw somewhere someone say time was that would be disqualifying. Sure would have been. And for a lot of voters, it's been disqualifying. They've voted against a lot of people like that. But, I think you're right. Everybody's going to lie at the hearings.
She was leading an investigation into a criminal case against Trump University. Trump made her a donation, and the case disappeared. Now, maybe there wasn't a quid pro quo, maybe, but it goes to such terrible judgment that you would take a donation from an organization under investigation in your office that just by itself, that too is disqualifying.
Well, I think so, too. I think, it's all going to be relative from here on in, like how bad is the person. Marco Rubio seems like a totally respectable pick in this context. I mean, he actually knows about foreign policy and intelligence. It's the whole situation. You have to be measured, and you also have to laugh. So can I tell you one joke?
Yeah, I'd love to hear a joke.
This is from Dad Says Jokes, and it's from a Substack that on Saturday does just a lot of light stuff by Jay Quo. Anyway, I taught my kids about democracy tonight by having them vote on which movie to watch and pizza to order. I then picked the movie and pizza because I'm the one with the money. Which, don't you think totally, you're not laughing, Edwin. Don't you think that describes what's happening right now?
It does. It absolutely does.
We're getting a lesson in the people with the money. So,
well, I don't want to live in an oligarchy. I've worked in places around the world, certainly in the Middle East, where the emirs form a kind of oligarchy, and that's where they have the money, and they decide who gets a piece of it and who doesn't. And a lot of people live good lives in that world, but they're all second class to the rulers. Russia is, had oligarchs until Putin decided that he wanted to be the only oligarch. The CCP in China is a one-party rule. They decide who gets what and how that works. I mean, billions of people live that way, but we were supposed to be different.
I think we'll keep being different, but we're having a little interregnum where we're being tested. The thing that really annoys me a lot is how expensive this is. The resources and money and energies of everybody trying to fight back and maintain and hope that the status quo will be back again, hope that the traditional values and rule of law and constitutional order and all that and world leadership will be back at the end of all of this. And that's going to take a lot of money, a lot of energy, a lot of organizing, a lot of creative thinking about media and all kinds of other things. It's both near term. It's going to start on day one of his term, and it's long term for the midterms and the next presidential election. So it's even exhausting to think about. And I remember doing a piece when I was at USA Today about the high cost of Republican rule, and taking Florida as an example where where first you had Rick Scott as governor and then you had Ron DeSantis, and the legal fees, there were tens of millions of taxpayer dollars going to legal fees because, the lawsuits they filed and the lawsuits people filed against them. And the Justice Department, the federal Justice Department, was in the same sort of situation. The January 6th prosecutions and investigations have cost tens of of millions of dollars, possibly hundreds by now. And, that's even before you get to the kind of corruption where the incoming president says, I'm just going to mass pardon everybody who stormed the Capitol.
Yeah, Chicago spends a fortune on the settlement of wrongful death suits and otherwise or settlement of police wrongdoing, suits, and has forever. We do not practice good governing here, and it's enormously expensive. And I can't, on a state level, it's 10 times whatever the biggest city could be. And at a national level, it's hundreds of times, maybe thousands of times more costly and damaging.
Yeah, and the other part of that is that we're already, months before Trump comes into office, we're already in this cyclone mode of where do we focus? What do we do? The first person I talked to after the election, aside from you while you were walking your dog, was Noah Bookbinder, the head of Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. They're a corruption watchdog, and I said, how are you going to handle this next time? These are the people who compiled something like, 3,700 or 4,700 examples of conflicts of interest in the first term. So, they were exhausted by the end of that, and they'd filed all kinds of lawsuits and complaints and won some, but not big ones, and legal judgments that turn out not to be real life situation, the things that the judges say or the findings are never acted on, all that. So it was very unsatisfying. And I must say, I interviewed him the day before Gates and all the rest of these crazy pics started coming out. So I'm not sure if he would have been as calm and collected the next day, but he said, we're going to think about this. We're going to be strategic. We're going to decide what has the most impact, what will drive public opinion best, what is the right timing. We're just not going to jump all over everything, and we're going to wait and pick our shots. And I thought that was very wise. And then, of course, by the next day, all hell was breaking loose. I think he made maybe 3 of those nominations the same day. I don't remember which 3 besides Gates, but it was, it was shock and awe, kind of, or shock and awful.
Yeah, but he lost, right? He said there will be no hearings. There'll be recess appointments. He lost that. He said he made calls to the Senate to try and get Gates the nomination. He lost that. Gates didn't lose it. Trump did. Trump nominated him. He was Trump's nominee. Trump made calls to get the votes. He couldn't get them. I can just hear the conversation now with Senator McConnell. I need 11,000. No, I need 8 more votes. Sorry, buddy.
Well, one thing that'll be interesting is how many of the senators up for re-election in 2026 decide to retire. Because there are some that will. I would not be surprised if Mitch McConnell retired or Susan Collins. There are a few, and there are others who, may find it within themselves to just take the risk. Particularly, somebody like Tom Tillis, who's from North Carolina, which has turned into a swingy state. So, I think he's in there because there was a scandal with the Democrat the last time. But, there could be some surprises in terms of courage and resistance in the Senate.
I don't envy Republican senators. It serves them right, but I don't envy them because they got to choose between, worrying about a primary from the left and worrying about getting elected worrying about a primary from the right, and when the MAGA crowd wants to do things that are massively unpopular.
Yeah. Well, the whole idea that, you're anti-science or that you're coming in to run a 3 million person military or you're going to oversee 18 intelligence agencies, and people joke about you as a Russian asset because you're so friendly with Putin, or a strong man fangirl because you seem to have more support for Assad in Syria than you do for U.S. intelligence and the United States generally. So it's these are not going to be popular when they're known. And I do think
these hearings will have a chance to get them known. But what about, for gosh sakes, an FBI background check for these people? I mean, how arrogant is it to say we don't even need background checks? Because if they're compromised, we don't care.
In fact, all the better.
Well, I mean, Jill,
that seems to be...
if you're France, if you're the UK, even if you're Israel, who owes everything to the United States these days, why would you ever share intelligence with America with these guys in charge? You just don't know whether the things you share are safe at all. And that just makes us less safe.
Trump is the father of that whole phenomenon. I mean, one of the first things he did in his first term, literally in the first few months, was to invite top Russians into the Oval Office. America press were not allowed in. The only person there from the press was a TASS photographer, a Russian photographer. That's how we found out about the meeting. And then we found out that Trump spilled very sensitive intelligence to these two Russians, and it exposed Israeli intelligence gathering methods.
Yep.
So, right from the get-go. And then he finished, of course, by taking all the classified documents with him and probably waving them around before storing them in the bathroom. I mean, we know he kind of had the Iran war plan?
Yes.
He was waving around in an office at Bedminster. It's just been, I know that national security is not daily life. It's not the price of eggs or gas, but I mean, for Pete's sake, America, I mean, it's existential.
Well, when we see Ukraine slaughtered, Jill, Ukrainians slaughtered in big numbers, maybe that'll matter. I mean, do you think Donald Trump will lose, and he's a great negotiator that he is, every time he's in a room with Lavrov, who is so much smarter than he is and so much better manipulator of people. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, outfoxed him that time in that meeting, that meeting that was going to be a secret. But the Russians wanted everybody to know he had it because that was, they were in the Oval Office and they got secret information from him.
I know. So I don't know how you make people care about this. I think I was telling somebody that the Democrats really ought to have made the equivalent of the mushroom cloud ad, because this is, when you have Trump in charge of national security, I think he could never get cleared. I mean, we actually were warned about this FBI backgrounder stuff because one of the newspapers, the Times or the Post, did a piece about how they might just skip all of the FBI security clearance checks for everybody in the administration and go with a private firm. And you may remember that the last time around, I think it was his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who could not get clearance. Yep. And so he worked in the Oval, and he worked right in the West Wing anyway, and then went on to get lots of money from the Saudis. We can't.
So we can expect them to try and create oligarchy here with them sitting on top. We can expect America's billionaires to rush to bend the knee and get their deal, selling everybody else out en route. The question is sort of on a social, regular Americans, whether they feel like these guys are working for them or not. And, right now they feel, they're going to work for me. They get it. And, but reality, intervenes. It does. And we've handed him a great economy. He could coast on it and he could be a very popular president. right? I mean, all this work,
I don't think that
infrastructure projects coming online, but he's not going to do it. He's going to do something terrible on day one.
I think that's right. I mean, they're already talking about doing a lot, once again, repealing the Affordable Care Act and, imposing all kinds of work requirements and cutting back on Medicaid and making it really difficult to enroll in even regular insurance, on the exchange. And they're equating not having insurance with not having a job, which is ridiculous because practically 30% of U.S. employers don't offer insurance. I mean, it's just, I think it's not going to go well after a certain point, and especially if they go with tariffs. Oh, I think we forgot about the Treasury Secretary, who is, I think, on Trump's page on tariffs, but also it comes to the job from a hedge fund where apparently his decisions account made them lose 90% of their value.
I think he also used to work for George Soros, so it'll be interesting to hear these Republicans wrap their arms around that.
Well, that's true. That's true. I was surprised by the person he chose to be the labor secretary, a centrist Republican who just lost her seat in Congress, and I think her husband was her father was in the Teamsters. So I don't know what's going to happen there. That seems a little bit off message.
You know what? It says to me that they don't care at all about it. They think it's a backwater. They're going to pay no attention to it. And sure, they'll put somebody there who, ostensibly is fine. They'll put out the labor statistics, maybe. But it says they don't really care about that. Like putting Ben Carson in charge of HUD last time.
Right. They've got another guy who doesn't really know much about housing. But the worst, possibly the worst is the new Office of Management and Budget Director, Russ Vought, who had that job in the last round and is a driving force of Project 2025 and concentrating power in the executive. And they're going to be challenging the idea that you can just not bother to use the money that Congress appropriated for something. Right. OMB actually decided the last time around that Trump broke the law when he didn't give Ukraine the money for defense that Congress had given Ukraine, had appropriated for Ukraine. Yeah.
Well, I think that's right. And I think the Impoundment Control Act will be repealed in the first month.
You think that Congress is going to do that? You think the Republican Senate will do that? I think they're going
to try. And they may resist. And if they resist, thank God. And then they'll go to the courts. And, John Roberts, who is no fan of democracy and no fan of rights, and seems to believe presidents are kings and above the law, will say, well, whatever. I mean, I guess the law doesn't matter, Jill. If the president doesn't spend the money, but this is an official duty, like who can hold him accountable? He can't be sued. The courts won't take it because he's immune.
Well, I'd add to your list of John Roberts. He's no fan of checks and balances. He seems to willfully ignore the system of separation of powers, and they take it all for themselves on that court when they want it, and they'll give it all to a president of their liking. It's the day that Jack Smith and his team walk out of the Justice Department is going to be a very sad day. I keep wondering, actually, whether if somebody had just given Trump a pardon, he would have just not run. Preemptive pardons all around. Just go to Mar-a-Lago, live your life.
Yeah, well, that's not where we are. I mean, I hope Jack Smith has written a great report, and I hope the Senate, before the new or House, before the change of rulers, they hear that he come in for a hearing and he lay out everything he's found. I don't expect he will. 20th. I expect he'll mothball it, but it would, it's a disservice. He really needs to do that.
Who are you talking about? Biden?
I'm talking about Jack Smith.
Jack Smith. Yeah. No, I mean, the Senate will do it if it's still under Democratic control till January 3rd. They have.
All right, Jill. One more question, and it's a real simple one. And then we got to go. But this is really easy. Should Joe Biden pardon absolutely everybody in the Justice Department before he leaves office?
Yes.
Huh. Interesting.
I mean, because there's going to be reverse weaponization. Trump's going to sue all of them. Might as well make sure their lives aren't ruined in advance. I mean, does anyone there deserve to be sued? I don't know. But I would give them the benefit of the doubt at this point.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't.
No?
No, I don't want to give him 4 years to say, see, they were crooked, and this proves it.
Oh, man. Well, okay. I'm going to send you my new column when it comes out because it has I can't really talk about it, but, it might ease the path for some of the people that are going to be prosecuted or fired or, primaried, et cetera, et cetera. We'll see.
I look forward to it. All right, Jill, tell them where they can find your column before you go.
It'll be at thebulwark.com. Hope to see you there. And I'm also on Blue Sky now, mostly.
That is excellent. Do not go to that other place. Don't do it. It's just training his AI on you. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Edward. Definitely will send you my stuff.
Thanks, Jill. It's a pleasure.
Take
Talk
care.
to you later. All right, everybody, we're going to take a break, and I'm going to hear from you when we come back.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
All right, Jim, kick us off.
Hi, Edwin. In my misspent youth, I saw two presidents leave office, one through assassination 61 years ago yesterday, and Richard Milhous Nixon for criminality. But it appears that we'll never see another president for criminality be removed from office. And it's interesting to think that the top executive, whatever you want to call this guy, is such a criminal, and he'll never be prosecuted for anything he's done. And it's interesting when other people are going to court and getting large sentences and so on and so forth, and you have a criminal of this magnitude will never be touched by justice. It's really an incredible situation. But that's what we're involved in. So I can't see, especially with this enhanced power of dictatorship. I mean, that's really beyond the pale. And then you'll get two more judges. And I imagine that his son-in-law, they'll probably run for some political position. And nothing else to do. They just have, gobs of money and nothing to do. So, and they'll probably steal a fortune. But in the meantime, in between time, we got fun. You know, Edwin?
Well, look, last week when you and I talked, you were talking about how terrible Matt Gaetz is, right? And we beat him. And there weren't even going to be hearings. And now they're going to be hearings, and Gaetz is gone. So we can win. We can fight back. We have to do it. We have to do it smart. We have to do it with determination. Americans are fundamentally still decent and didn't sign up for the horror show that they don't really know is coming. It's coming.
The Justice Department should be the woman, the next one in line, is she suppressed a investigation for Trump University, took a $25,000 under the table donation from Trump, whatever, another criminal, and she's going to be running the Justice Department. And she was also a lawyer in the first impeachment trial, which was enough to remove her from office. But apparently the Republicans refused to do it. When are the Republicans going to get a spine? That's what I want to know. When are they going to get?
You know what? When Americans demand it. It wasn't Democrats who got rid of Gates. I mean, we raised the stink, and that's not fair. We did participate in getting rid of him by saying by making this a big deal. But it was Republican senators who said they weren't voting for him.
But good luck. Anyway, and then what about Huckabee? How about Huckabee? How can they make Huckabee, that lunatic, crazy the bedbug? He's going to be the ambassador of Israel. I mean, how crazy is that?
I think it's great. Get him out of the country. Leave him over there. Nobody's going to care what he says. Trump's going to do his own diplomacy over there, with Bibi. And Huckabee's useless, but at least now he is out of this country and it's in silence. He can go. He can, he can walk the Via Dolorosa. He can have the experience, the religious experience he wants to have, and God bless him for having it. But he's no longer our problem.
Edwin, have a great week. Have a great week. Thank you, Edwin. Take care, buddy.
You bet. All right, everybody. I'm taking your calls at 773-763-9278. And I'm not despairing. This is me to remind you, we lost. Absolutely, we lost. No question. But for gosh sakes, I mean, think about this. Well, we had 100 days to get a new candidate and a new campaign, had to retool everything. I think Kamala ran a pretty good campaign. I mean, nobody runs a perfect campaign. She ran a pretty good campaign. And we did pretty well. We didn't win. And we lost to this appalling guy, which makes it feel like we did worse than we did. The real issue, is how do we get Americans to see what we see a little bit more, because they're hidden from it. They don't, they see Donald Trump on a long form interview where he's charming, and he can be charming, and they don't know what a danger he is. They think all politics is he said, she said, so they discount any of the charges that are made against him, even ones that stick in court. We need to improve the information system out there. That's why I do this radio show every week. That's why you guys take what you hear and tell everybody. It's why you've been sharing, what I and others write on Substack, and it just makes a difference. And we have to expand that reach more and more and more, because there is a horror show coming to America, and we have to make sure, that we talk about it properly. It is owned and fully the responsibility of the Republicans in power. Dave, what do you think?
Hey, Edwin.
I'm here. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear if you had got. Hey, have you read on that Lev Parnas's book, that Shadow Diplomacy?
I did not read the book. I did see the movie that Rachel Maddow made about it, but I did not read the book.
Yeah. Well, he had said in that book that Trump was more scared of losing the 2020 election more so than the 2016, as he made it abundantly clear that he had no respect at all for one-termers like George H.W. Bush and Jimmy Carter. He said this struck him as embarrassingly weak about getting a job and not being able to hold on to it. And his opinion
You mean he's sensitive about somebody saying you're fired?
Well, you know what they say, that you point the finger, it's three pointing back at you. So, and his opinion was term limits were a stupid rule. He believed you should be able to keep the job as long as you possibly can, and he saw it as everybody's job to keep him in office for as long as we all could. So, so are we sure he's going to finish up after 4 years? Remember, he talked about being a dictator.
He would love to be a dictator, but he could be successful, Dave. He could do none of the things he's promised, because we have given him a super economy. We beat inflation. We're about to launch huge infrastructure projects. He'll have some foreign policy work to do, but if he does it, I mean, even, immigration's way down. Look, if he does nothing, I'm okay with that. It won't be damaging. The problem is I don't think he's going to do nothing. I think he's filling his government with people who are radically insane, who are going to do really terrible things. But then, you know what? We have an election in 2 years, not in 4 years.
Right.
And we will elect people who are tough, who go to the Congress and say, I'm sorry, no.
Yeah. And I mentioned about Huckabee in that book. He said that Huckabee, that he'd be visiting Israel at least 3 to 5 times a year. So, you know, Trump just kind of rewarded him, you know, for his loyalty.
Great.
And,
God bless him. I mean, as I say, we, out of the country, you know, when was the last time you heard from an ambassador? You know, they're not allowed to be like in the news all the time. They got other things they have to do. So we are done hearing from Huckabee. I'm delighted. You think Bibi cares? You're going to pick about what he says? The Israelis don't care. You know, I mean, the Palestinian community should care that Trump appointed somebody who doesn't think they exist.
Yeah. Hey, Edwin, I'll close out with some of these, you know, got rid of Getz right now, and this other guy for the veterans. Let's hope he gets, you know, be the next one. And you ever get the feeling that some of these ones that he's picking is kind of like that the scene from Blazing Saddles where Harvey Korman was looking for deputies. And that,
a little. Now you remind me. It's been a while. I mean, I think I saw it when it came out, but yeah.
Yeah, they were up by the railroad, and then he's the one, like he's saying, you know, robbery, rape, or whatever. He said, rape twice, and he's like, I like rape.
Yeah, so, appalling. Just appalling.
Oh, yeah. And anyway, they shouldn't even be considered. I mean, it shows what a bizarre world we got going on there. But let me clear off so somebody else can get through. So thanks for taking the call.
All right, Dave, thank you. You bet.
Well.
Gregory, you're next.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Eisendrath. I have been listening to Chicago Public Radio, and I guess besides Amy Goodman of Democracy Now! And Santita Jackson and yourself, who conceded that NATO expansion has been problematic, most of the hosts and most of the Democratic mainstream party are tone deaf about why we lost tens upon tens of thousands of votes in the election, in part because two raging wars that were started on the Biden-Harris watch and mismanaged and not ended. He sent her there 3 days before Putin went in. All they had to do was say Ukraine will not join NATO. It will be neutral. This is the third time this has happened. And when I went over it, you said you didn't want me to go over too much background, but I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis when he put them in Turkey. Kennedy put the missiles in Turkey with NATO. Khrushchev put them in Cuba. Then we had the Persian II missiles when Reagan was president. I went to the European Disarmament Conference and the worldwide protest over nuclear missiles. And then Reagan and Gorbachev got together and said, we're in this madness. We'll get rid of the Iron Curtain and open up Eastern Europe, but NATO will not extend 1 inch east of East Germany. Now, this is the third time in my 64 years that I have to see them talking about the possibility of nuclear war because Ukraine didn't want to let the Donbass go to the Russians, a 1,000-year-old region, and they started the NATO intelligence officers I talked to, like other reports, were that they started the shelling. He said, you know, they started and killed 7,000 people with their shelling. So they want their own country because they've been horribly oppressed by the Russians over the last 300 years. But these two tribes need to be separated and then not join NATO, and it's over. And then I asked three young minorities who are not prejudiced or misogynist. I asked an African-American guard at a major bank branch 2 years ago, did he realize that they want to get NATO, Ukraine and NATO, so that the American hypersonic missiles will only be 5 minutes away from Moscow, 308 miles. It's like the other far side of Carbondale to Chicago. He said, yeah, he could see that. And then I asked just after the election, a half African-American, half Puerto Rican woman, 30-year-old, working at a major retail place that I had dealt with before. And she said she understood why some people voted for either candidate. And as far as the Ukraine war goes, she said she could see that they would have a better chance of ending with Trump because he says he's going to try and just get this thing over with. And with Harris, the war would probably have a better chance of continuing. And finally, a 25-year-old African-American worker at O'Hare was sitting there bopping and dancing and smiling and clicking his fingers. I said, "You're so happy after the election. Why are you so happy? Do you think Trump's going to end the war?" So he said, "He ended it already. He thinks he's already ended the war in Ukraine." But Democrats talk about how wonderful our platform was, which it was, but never say where we came up short on our platform. And the war in Ukraine and not getting Netanyahu in line and under control. Now he's a war criminal and they're bombing houses and civilians right and left instead of getting him under control. And now they let him come out with no tax on tips first and no tax on Social Security. I'll just quote this and then I'm done. DeWitt said in his postmortem that the Democratic Party has become a fancy pants know-it-all, college-educated suburbanite party. She's got these wonderful programs for the middle class, but misses the poorest of us. Service sector workers on tips and seniors on fixed senior Social Security income. What do you think, Edwin?
Well, there's a lot there. I don't completely agree with you on your foreign policy. I don't. I think a lot of people think the expansion of NATO is something the Russians hate, but the expansion of NATO is not a reason to butcher people in the Ukraine the way they have. Not. Just like what happened. What the Russians have done in Ukraine is hideous, dangerous war crime, awful. And blaming it on NATO expansion, I just don't buy that.
The Ukrainians started the bombing.
Hang on. And on Israel, I don't think that Joe Biden could have ordered the war to be stopped. We'll see I actually think the addition of the ATACMS, the medium-range missiles that are now the Ukraine can now fire into Russia, will make it easier for Donald Trump to oversee a peace because Ukraine will gain something. I do.
On that good note, I'll let you go, Edwin, and talk to you later.
All right. Anyway, thank you for your call. Let's see. What do I want to? I think I want to go back to where I was a little bit in the beginning. I mean, Greg was talking about foreign policy and whether or not there were mistakes. No question, the wars around the world weighed heavily on some Americans when we voted. Although most of the data is that inflation was a much higher issue. The border was a much higher issue. Abortion, much higher issue. But we should pay attention to the world. We should pay attention. It's a interconnected, not such a huge place. Those two big oceans do not make us separate from the rest of the planet. And the things that we share, like our climate, like how we are going to think about trade, like how we think about global security. These are important and complicated questions. And so you want people who are thoughtful and who are able to talk to others who are thoughtful, people who have some experience to play major roles for, after all, the most important country in the world in these fields. And already the incoming president has said, nope, we are not going to do that. Well, I'm not even going to bother with background checks. We're going to put somebody who's widely thought of as, teased as a Russian asset in charge of all of our security. So much for trading information on the espionage around the world. We're going to put a guy whose only real interest in the military is turning it on American citizens in charge of the U.S. military, and to take the generals who have earned the trust of the men and women in the armed forces and parade them around in some kind of, weird military tribunal because they aren't politically what the president thinks he wants, the incoming president. This is so. I mean, honestly, even if Greg and I don't agree on whether NATO expansion is to blame for the horrors in Ukraine, we both think, I assume, and next week you can tell me, that you need to have very thoughtful and serious people trying to tackle these issues, not like whoever is, sat on Fox News and tickled the president's fancy. It's disgraceful. It's dangerous. And I think we should have nothing to do with it. I'm sorry, I'm talking in your time. I apologize. Andy Sherry, I guess you can finish us off today.
Hi, yes. But I can't even tell you how dejected I feel. Anyway, I'm really, I stopped listening to some broadcasts because of all the Monday morning quarterbacking about how the Harris-Walz campaign was conducted. I stopped listening to Tom Hartman because he said, we should have had a primary. Give me a friggin' break. People need to realize hate trumps everything. Hate trumps everything. And hate and fear. And, Trump, he went back to his German roots and definitely probably look at some Hitler, some Hitler campaigns and speeches. And he looked almost to the hand gestures, the hateful speech. She played it to a T. And unfortunately, Edwin, when a certain demographic who's used to being in power feels threatened, feels outnumbered, fear and hate comes into play. And I'm sorry, Kamala and they ran a fantastic. Listen, they had white dudes for Kamala. Come on, everybody. Well, the Democrats should have done this. The Democrats. Listen, I'm sorry. Hate trumps inclusion. It trumps love. It trumps all of that. And unfortunately, there are some people that just think that they're losing their power, their voice, and they are in the minority. And that's what Trump tapped into. All this, they campaign. I'm sorry. No. Hate this Trump inclusion. And like I said, those who feel as if they are losing power, they will come out winning and doing whatever they can.
Well, don't feel so down. This was a hard loss for sure. A very hard loss. And if you heard the beginning of this show, you heard me talk about how impatient I am with everybody who's saying the Democrats should do this and the Democrats should do that. Kamala ran a very good campaign. Now, maybe if there had been a primary, she'd have been in better position than she was in. I don't know the answer to that for sure. But what I do know is it's irrelevant. Right now, we have this terrible guy in there, and he's going to do terrible things. And I don't agree with you that hate trumps love. I think sometimes it wins, but those people who are
go ahead, sweetheart. Go ahead. I wish. Go ahead.
Now, a lot of his voters, they haven't yet seen what he's going to do. They don't pay enough attention. They haven't heard it. I'm afraid, he's not going to do them any favors. He's going to be they're going to end up worse too. So,
but Edwin, it's not logic. Okay, I know you got to go, and it's not
but
logic.
Listen, first off, tell me where you're going. I don't think we've talked. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Las Vegas. I'm originally from California, moved to Chicago in 2011. Absolutely loved it. fell in love with you, with oh gosh, what was Dick Kay? And who's my old young brother in the afternoon? When he comes on Saturday, I can't think of his name now.
And you're in Las Vegas now.
Yeah. And
well, thank you
guys are my lifeline to sanity.
I appreciate that so much.
And I listen to you. I listen to Jones. House Sparks. I listen to House Sparks.
House Sparks.
I listen to House Sparks and Rick Smith. But I have tuned out Tom Hartman. When he came up with that, we should have had a primary. I said, nope. I mean, I used to him religiously. I said, nope. And that, I just have to maybe just not listen to him as much anymore. Of course, Stephanie Miller.
You hear that music? They're playing us off. Thank you for calling. Thank you all for participating today. Thanks for all that you did, and keep it up. We have a lot of work ahead.